Good morning, I am Pramod Kumar Srivastava, Professor, TMU, TIMIT. Today I am going to deliver lecture. The subject is Business Research Methodology, and in Business Research Methodology we are going through the topic related with the research process. In the research process we are going to deliver the literature review or review of the literature. So, the outcome of this topic is to understanding of existing research, provide a comprehensive overview of existing literature related to the research topic, identifying the gap, helping to identify the gap in our current knowledge which can inform the direction of new research, and contextual framework, establish a contextual framework for the research study. So, these are the outcome to know the review of the literature or the literature review. So, after formulation and identification of the problem, that is the first step in the research process, the next important step is the review of literature survey. An exhaustive and critical review of a professional literature familiarizes the researcher with the current state of knowledge. It helps in understanding of the problem and hypothesizing that others have studied. It clarifies the concept, theories, major variables involved, operational definition, and the research method used in the past. This contributes to the cumulative nature of the scientific knowledge. Every year thousands of articles, books, and the monograms are published in any field of the study. Therefore, it is important to sort out the relevant literature connected with the field of one's interest. Whatever we are going to study, that text or that literature is relevant with that research or with the study. It is the best being any search for the literature with one of the published literature. These guides are increasingly computerized and include bibliographic index and abstract. With the advent of the internet in the modern life has changed drastically. One can find an ocean of the information within the four walls of one study room through internet. Some of the popular search engines like Google, Yahoo, Rediff are becoming more popular in searching for the literature on the topic, or we can say that the review of the literature. So, next slide is review. Literature review is a documentation of the comprehensive review of a published or unpublished work from the secondary source of data in the area of specific interest to the researcher. So, in simply we can say that literature review is a documentation, either it is published or it is not published. The main aim is to find out the problem that are already investigated and those that need further investigation. So, in a literature review, the main aim is that already investigated information we go through, and on that basis we want to go further for the investigation, what happened in the further study or what will be the find outs by the further studies. So, it is an extensive survey of all available past studies relevant to the field of investigation. So, whatever the investigation we are going through the research process, it is an extensive survey of all available past studies. Whatever the past studies or whatever the available past studies, we go for the extensive survey of the field of investigation, in which field we are going to investigate. It gives us knowledge about what others have found out in the relevant field of study and how they have done so. It also give you the input that what we are going to study as well as what other already studied on the particular topic and reach to the findings. And sometime we are going to criticize the others finding, that finding is actually relevant or not. So sometime we are going for the testing of the relevancy of the other study also. Next slide is purpose of a review. Why we are going to review any literature? So in this slide we go through the actual purpose of the review. To gain a background knowledge of the research topic, whatever the topic we are going to study in our research. So first of all we go through the background of the study, what are the actually studied on the particular topic and how they are studying, what kind of information, what kind of data involved or what kind of statistical analysis we involve in that study. We are going through that literature review. On that basis, it is very simply on the basis of the literature review we can easily finding the gaps. On that gaps we have to actually study it. To identify the concept related to a potential relation between them and to formulate the researchable hypothesis. So second purpose is that we have going for the literature review or review of the literature. So first identify the concrete relation between the potential relation between or concrete relation between the what actually happened and what will be happened in the future, or we already on that basis we have able to we can able to formulate hypothesis. To identify appropriate methodology, research design methods of measuring concept and technique of analysis. So for by the research review or literature review, by literature review we can able to identify appropriate methodology, what kind of methodology we are going to introduce to reach at the level of finding, or we can able to analyze the information, whatever the information we are gathering through different steps of the research. Second thing is that the research designing, which kind of actual research required, that also depend upon the review of the literature, because review of the literature giving you a sense or insight for or the research design, and the technique of analysis, what kind of statistical measures we are going to use for the analysis of the information, whatever the information we are gathered during the research process. So that information or data from might be the secondary source or might be the primary source. So these are the information, and on that basis of the information we are able to analyze the process, whatever the process we are going to study. To identify the data source used to the other researcher. So whatever the other researcher using different kind of data sources, we also going to analyze or understand why they are using that kind of data sources, to learn how other structure their report, whatever the report writing by the others people in the past, we also learn through the literature review or review of the literature. So these are the point we are understanding in the process of purpose of review, why we are reviewing the literature. Next, how to conduct the literature survey. How to conduct the literature survey? First we have to identify the relevant sources. whatever the sources that actually relevant with our topic, our problem, and what actually researcher want to do in their research. Second, extract and record relevant information. Whatever the information we are finding, first of all we extract that information and recording that relevant information that actually have any meaning related with the topic, whatever the topic or whatever the problem or whatever the objective or question we are raising in the first step of the research process. Write up the literature review, whatever the information we are gathering, whatever the text we are gathering, on that basis we are going to write the things. That thing is actually able to give you a input or give you a space for finding the gap, and on which gap we are going to study in our research. Next is the source of literature review. So there are the various sources of the literature review. We are reviewing the literature on the basis of the books and journal available in a different different spaces, like it is available in our library, or we are gathering information from Google or a different search engine by a level by the internet availabilities, electronically database, whatever the electronic database, bibliographical database, abstract database, full text database. So these are the these three are considered in the electronic database. Next resource is the government and industry report. In different time and different process, government is publishing different kind of reports and informations, and that kind of report and information sometimes we are using published information, sometimes we are using unpublished information. That all depend upon the situation, availability and the ability to gather that information and getting the permission regarding using the unpublished resources. Sometimes we haven't ability or haven't any permission to use unpublished resources. At that condition we cannot use that kind of information in our research, because that is also part of the code and conduct. Next is internet. Through internet, these days it is very easy for a researcher to gather information from internet, because before the internet it is very tough to find out the information. There is only one source, that is the published source available in the library or different archives, and at that situation it is very tough to find out the exact information from these sources. But internet giving you a very ease or very easy for gather the information, because there are so many search engine, there are so many filters available in the internet abilities, and by that you can gather the information in very simple, very accurate, very relevant in a very short period time. And the research dissertation and thesis, the different researcher already created different dissertation during their academic process, as well as their written thesis is available in the different archive platforms. That platform is also available in internet as well as the library. Sodhganga is one of the important platform for the researcher. They can gather different dissertation and theses from that site. So we can say that these are the sources, and from that sources we can gather the information for the literature review. So we simply say that that are the sources of the literature review. Recording the literature review. Whatever the information we are gather from the different sources, the next step we have to record that information. The most suitable method of recording notes is the card system. Through the card system we are recording that information, and that information is recorded on the card. The recording system involves use of two set of cards, one source card and the size of source card is 3 multiplied 5 inches, used for noting the bibliographic information, and the second source is the note card and we use the this size of 5 into 8 use of the actual note taking informations. And the source card is next, the source card serve two purposes when we are using the source card, and that solve our two purposes. First is provide the documentary information for footnotes. Whatever the information we are writing in our literature review, that information must be referred by some persons, because in a literature review we are not giving our personal inputs, that should be cited informations, and for cited information we are frequently mostly researcher using footnotes. So source card is one of the important way to use the, through the, that source card we can take input for our footnotes. Second is that it is used for the compelling bibliography to be given at the end of the report. Whatever the report we are finally created, and after that the last space in the report is, that is the bibliography, and we can use that information in our bibliography also. So source card is important for documentary information in a footnote as well as the bibliographic inputs. Next in the source card is, source card can be coded by the simple system in order to relate them to corresponding note card. So we can say that there is no very big difference between the source card and the note card. Making a combination of letters and the number on the right hand top corner, that being with C or completing either C1 or C2 or C3, making the letters B or J or R. So B for the book, J for journal, or R for the report. So these are the information we are using in a very shortcut manner, and that make you easy to memorize that from where you can get that information. You can get that information from book, or you get the information from journal, or you get the information from the reports. Next is the next point, and or the next slide in the source card, that the recording of the bibliographic information should be made in a proper bibliographic format. So there are different format when we are writing the bibliography. There are the different format of the bibliography. One of the most format is the API formats. So mostly researcher using API format in the when they are writing the bibliography, or the format of citing a book in that is given in this slide, that first use the name of the author, year, title of the book, place of the publication, publisher's name, examples name given, and after author's name there is in the year of the publication. After publication there is in the title of the book, and after title of the book the publisher, place of the publication. These are the information we are using in the source card and for the purpose of the bibliography, and also we are using for the purpose of the footnote in our research. So there are the certain differences between the citing of the book or citing of the journals. So the both things are given in this slide, that how we are citing the books or how we are citing journals. In the next slide, note cards. Note card detailed information extended from a printed source is recorded on the note card. Whatever the information we are availing, that information is recorded in the note card, and it is desirable to note a single fact or the idea on each card on one side only. We are only using that note card in a one side, where the back of the card we are not using, that is blank. Next slide is how to write the review. There are the several ways of presenting the idea of others within the body of the paper. For example, if you are referring the major influencing factor in the set model of the industrial buying behavior, it can be written as, this is the way how we are citing set, year and the page number has suggested that there are a number of influencing factor, or in a other way, according to set, year, model of the industrial buying behavior, there are a number of influencing factor. So these are the way how we are writing the citation in our research paper or the thesis or any research articles. So next slide is third point is, in some model of the industrial buying behavior, there are a number of influencing factor. Set 1973. In some model of the industrial buying behavior, there are the number of influencing factors, one, and that is also written in the footnote. What is the meaning of the one, or how one is described. So this is the way here given in the one, and this is written in the footnotes. So they are the way how we are giving the citation, how we are using the footnote, how we are writing footnotes. So by this way we can understand that, or you can understand that how we using the citation and how we are using the footnotes in our research or the any articles or in our thesis. In the next slide, that is related with the point to be kept in the mind while reviewing the literature. When we are in the process to review the literature, we have go through these points. First thing is that extensively go through to read the relevant literature, whatever the literature that have connected with your study, we have to go through that literature. And if you are missing with the relevant context or relevant text, it might be your research quality is not considered good research quality. So you have go for the extensive study in the relevant context. Second is refer original works. Whatever the work already done related with your topic or related with your problem, go through the reference and use that reference in your research, as in the citation that is already inform you or make you understanding that how we are citing that information in your research, how you are writing the footnotes in your research. Third is the read with the comprehension. Whatever the information you are gathering from your study or from reading the relevant topics or various relevant topics, first of all you have to comprehend that information, because there is in the limited space in research. You cannot write so many things or so many information in your research. So you have ability to comprehend that information in a very shorter way or in a very few words. Next is read in time. Whatever the information you are gathering, that should be in a time frame. You haven't long time period, or you haven't a infinite time, you haven't a finite time period. So every research have a certain targets or certain time frames. So you have to complete your reading within a certain time frames. And the last one is index the literature. Whatever the literature you are putting in your research, you have to indexing that literature. And the very simple way to indexing the literature, we are using Excel also, and by Excel we are indexing different information related with the different research article. That research article is relevant with our research. So these are the points to be kept in a mind when we are reviewing the literature. So this is the very important point. You have to go through that important point when you are in position to review the literature. Next is the hypothesis. So after literature review, we are able to, and hypothesis is also considered as in the third step. In this step, we are able to design the hypothesis through the information coming by review of the literature or literature review, because on the basis of literature review we find out the gap, and that gap is giving you a insight to design a hypothesis. So hypothesis is also a questioning related with the research, and that questioning is accepted or not accepted depend upon the information we are gathering, and on that information we are testing that hypothesis. And testing of hypothesis is a statistical analysis. On that statistical analysis, if we are able to accept that hypothesis, then there is no problem. When we are not able to accept that hypothesis, then we have to go for the alternative hypothesis. Sometimes we use that alternative hypothesis in same research, and sometimes we are not using that hypothesis in the same research, in other research, or other researcher also using that hypothesis, and on that basis they have ability to create alternative hypothesis. So in a very simple objective, or we can say that why we are developing hypothesis, that depend upon this point. First, the research focus. Define the focus and direction of the research. The first objective or the first outcome of developing a hypothesis, we have to understand the direction of the research, how we can define the focus and the direction of research we are developing the hypothesis. Second is a testable prediction. Whatever the hypothesis or whatever the information, whatever the formulation we are creating or developing, that should be testable, that should be tested by the statistical measurement. Then that hypothesis is considered, and that meaning that the testable prediction, whatever the prediction we are predicting, that should be tested. If that prediction is not testable, we cannot using that kind of hypothesis. Third point is that the formulation for the study. Provide a formulation for the research design or the methodology. Whatever the research study we are formulating, that also based on the hypothesis. So formulation of the study or the formulation of the research design or the methodology, hypothesis is considered as a very important elements in the research process. Here in this slide we already discussed that why we are using hypothesis in our research. So there are three important point, or very crucial or critical important point considered as. First, the research focus, for the focusing of the research, because it defines the focus and the direction of the research. Second, it should be testable. If hypothesis is testable prediction, then we are using the hypothesis. And third one is formulation for the study. Whatever we are going for the study, what kind of research design we are introducing and what kind of methodology we are using, these all depend upon the hypothesis. So by studying the development of the hypothesis, we understand these three things. So go through the development of the hypothesis. So once a problem is defined, that is the first step of the research process, and the second step of the research process is the review of the literature. So when we are completing the first step, the problem definition, and the second step is the literature review, the next step is we are going to define a clear cut hypothesis in the research problem, and all research problem depend upon these hypotheses, because a hypothesis is directly related with our research problem. A hypothesis is tentative assumption of the research problem. Whatever the problem, that hypothesis is considered as the tentative assumption, which has to be tested empirically with the help of the observed data. Whatever data we are collecting, on that basis we have to test that hypothesis. When formulating a hypothesis, a researcher does not know whether it will be rejected or accepted. So at the time of formulation of hypothesis, no researcher can promise that hypothesis is accepted or rejected. That all depend upon when we are going for or the process of testing the hypothesis. On testing of the hypothesis, after testing of the hypothesis, we can understand that which hypothesis is accepted or which hypothesis is not accepted. So acceptance and rejection of the hypothesis is finalized after the testing of that hypothesis. When formulating the hypothesis, researcher does not know where it will be rejected or accepted. A hypothesis is constructed and tested, it is rejected, another one is formulated. When the situation is hypothesis is rejected, at the same time another hypothesis is formulated. It is incorporated in the scientific body of knowledge. One should arrive at a clear or specific working hypothesis for which research method already exists. A good hypothesis states a research problem in a concise and precise terms so that the researcher is focused on the problem at hand. So it is very required for a researcher to use the good quality of hypothesis. So in this slide, hypothesis is an assumption about relation between the variables. So whatever the variables we are using in our research, that variable have a assumption and the relation between the variables. So sometime there is a relation between the variables, we use it as in the acceptance of the hypothesis. Sometimes there is no relation between the variable, we can say that hypothesis is rejected, and we again go for incorporation of the new hypothesis on the basis of the rejection of the hypothesis. Hypothesis can be defined as a logical conjunction relation between two or more variables expressed in form of the testable statement. So whatever the information or statement we are gathering and establishing the logical relation between the variables, if we are able to establish the logical relation between the variable, that means that hypothesis is testable hypothesis, and that hypothesis is also considered as an acceptable hypothesis. Next slide is variables. When we are in the research process, we go through the lot of variables and lots of variables, and the variables are in a very different kind, or we can say that different type of variables we go through in our research. Anything that can be considered as a variable, so we can say that simply anything we can consider as the variable. So there is no any form, or there is no any law regarding that which thing is considered in the variable, which thing is not considered in the variable. So variable is anything that can be taken on differing or varying values. So what variables might be the quantitative variable, might be the qualitative variable. So for example, age, production unit, absenteeism, sex, motivation, income, height, weights, etc. These all are considered as the variables. Some variables in this example, some variable is qualitative variable, some variable quantitative variable, some variable is discrete variable, some variable is continuous variable. Note, the value can differ at the various time for the same object or the person at the same time for the different objects or the person. So, this is the very important point when we are studying or understanding the variables. So, variable also considered as in the attributes. So, a variable is a characteristics that taken on two or more value whenever an attribute is a specific value on the valuable qualitative terms. So, for example, the variable sex and gender has two attributes, because when we are using the sex, the male or female, or sometimes we are also using the transgender also. So, when we are using the transgender means sex have a three attributes. So, the variables and attributes, meaning that that variable related with the kind of the attributes. So, variable agreement has a 5 attributes, strongly agreed. So, on the rank correlation basis, where sometimes we are using 5 scale rank correlation, sometimes we are using 7 rank scale correlation. So, variables agreement has on 5 attribute base. So, simply we can say that the strongly agreed, neutral, disagree, or strongly disagreed. So, these are the 5 scale variables. Next slide is, just simply we divided variables into 3 types. First, explanatory variable or extraneous variables. So, variables selected for the analysis are called explanatory variables, and all other values that are not related to the purpose of the study but may affect the dependent variable are called extraneous variable. The explanatory variables and extraneous variables, the in a very simple manner, whatever the variable were taken for the study, that is called explanatory variables that have a self explanation, and that explanatory variable affected by the certain variable, that variable is considered as the extraneous variable, because extraneous variable affecting the explanatory variables. Second type is called as the dependent and independent variable that change the relationship for the changes in the other variable is called dependent variable, means that depend upon another factors or another variable, that is called dependent variable, and variable whose changes result to change in the another variable called independent variable, means that the dependent variable changes due to the certain variable, that type of variable is called independent variable. So, this is the differences between the dependent variable and independent variable. So, dependent variable is the one that influence the independent variable is the variable one that influence the dependent variable either a positive or negative way. So, in a simple manner we can say that independent variable influencing the dependent variable either it is in positive or negative manner. In the next slide, hypothesis. So, research hypothesis is the prediction or predictive statement that relate an independent variable to a dependent variable. So, in a very simple manner. The hypothesis meaning that the predictive statement relate to the independent variable to the dependent variables. The hypothesis must contain at least one independent variables and one dependent variables. When we are formulating the hypothesis, at least one dependent and one independent variables in every hypothesis. The next slide. Hypotheses are tentative, intelligent guesses as to solution of the problem. So simply we can say that the hypothesis is a tentative information or tentative findings related with our research, or it is a very intelligent guesses as the solution of the problem. Whatever the problem we are going to solve that problem, that hypothesis is giving you a tentative or intelligence guess regarding the problem. Hypothesis is a specific statement of a prediction. It describes in a concrete term what you expect to be happened in the study. So simply we can say that hypothesis is the very specific statement of the prediction related with the problem. Whatever the problem we are going to solve that problem, what is the predictive solution of that problem, that is the hypothesis, and giving you a concrete term what expect to be happened in the study. Actually after the study what will be happening, that is coming by the hypothesis. And hypothesis is an assumption about the population of the study. Hypothesis is also considered as the assumption of the population, that population is part of our study. It delimit the area of research and keep the researcher on the right track. So also we can say that the hypothesis is able to delimit the researcher and keeping the researcher in an actual path or exact path. If hypothesis is not defined in a very clear, precise or accurate manner, sometimes they lead to the destruction in the study or destruction in the finding of the study. Next slide is problem versus hypothesis. So how hypothesis and problem is differentiated? Hypothesis is an assumption that can be tested and can be proved to be right or wrong. So whatever the problem we are gathered in our research, on that basis we are reviewing the literature, and after reviewing the literature we are able to develop hypothesis, and that hypothesis is accepting or rejecting, that all depend upon the testing of a hypothesis. If the testing of hypothesis is successfully tested, that means that hypothesis is accepted. If that is not succeed, that hypothesis is called as the rejected hypothesis. So proved to be right or wrong, that coming after the testing of the hypothesis. A problem is broad question which cannot be directly tested. Whatever the problem we are collecting or gathering in our research, simply we are not able to test that problem, but on that problem basis we are developing the hypothesis and we are able to test that hypothesis. So defining the problem or converting the problem into the hypothesis, and again testing that hypothesis, and on the basis of the testing the hypothesis we reach to the level that what kind of solution for that problem or what kind of solution not will be or not probable solution for that problem, that is called as the rejection of that hypothesis. So problem is a broad question which cannot be directly tested. A problem can be scientifically investigating after converting it into a form of hypothesis. So, when we are converting the problem into the hypothesis, we are able to investigating that problem. So, itself problem is cannot be investigating, problem is investigating after converting into the hypothesis. Next slide is related with the characteristics of hypothesis. So, hypothesis have a different characteristic. First, it is conceptually clarity. It should be clear and precise. What hypothesis we are formulating, that should have a conceptualized on the basis of the problem, and that hypothesis is very precise and clear, means it is very understandable with the respondent. And if the respondent or researcher is not able to understand that hypothesis not considered the clear hypothesis. Specificity, it should be specific and limited in scope. What should be the hypothesis we are developing or formulating? It should be specific and have a limited scope. If the hypothesis is unlimited scope, we are not able to judge with or justify with our research finding. So, every hypothesis have a limited scope. Unlimited scope hypothesis we cannot mention in our research. Third point or the third characteristic is consistency. What should be consistent with the objective of the research? Whatever the hypothesis we are defining, that should be consistent with the objective of the research, whatever the objective we are finalized for their research. So, we can say that hypothesis relate with objective, or on the basis of the problem or on the basis of the objective we are designing the hypothesis. So, we can say that objective hypothesis is connected with the research objective. If our research objective is not connected with the hypothesis, we cannot say that there is the consistency in the hypothesis. And the fourth one is the testability. It should have a capability to test the hypothesis. If we are able to test the hypothesis, that means that hypothesis is accurate hypothesis, and that is really using for our research. If that hypothesis having the characteristics of the testability, we cannot use that kind of hypothesis in our research. And the expectancies, it should state the expected relation between the variables. So, the last characteristics of hypothesis is to establish a good relation or firm relation between the variables. So, these are the 5 characteristics of hypothesis: conceptual, specificity, consistency, testability and expectancies. Next type of characteristics is the simplicity. Whatever the hypothesis we are formulating or we are developing is in a very simple, it should be in a very possible terms, or it should be stated as possible in the very simple term, very simply understandable for everyone or every stakeholder of that research. And the next characteristics is the objectivity. It should not include the value judgment. It relevant term with any moral pitching. So, when we are formulating the hypothesis, only it is not a value judgment, it have a moral pitching. And the next characteristics is the theoretical relevance. Whatever the relevancy is in a hypothesis, that should be depend upon the theories, because theory is established on the basis of the hypothesis, and sometimes theory is criticized or establish a new theory, or sometime old theory is changes. That all depend upon the hypothesis and the acceptance of the hypothesis. If the significance is increasing in a very infinite manner, that hypothesis become a theory. Be available for testing the proposed hypothesis. So, whatever the hypothesis we are proposing, and that proposed hypothesis we have availability of the statistical testing methods. If we are proposing certain kind of hypothesis and that kind of hypothesis is not tested with the available testing statistical tools, that hypothesis haven't any meaning. So we can simply say that these are the characteristics of the hypothesis. Sources of the hypothesis. Sources of hypothesis. So these are the certain sources from by this way we can able to develop the hypothesis. Discussion with the colleagues or the expert about the problem, its origin and the objective is seeking the solution. So whatever the problem and whatever the objective you have to design for your research, you have to discuss with different level. You have to discuss with the expert, or you have to discuss with the colleagues, or sometimes we discuss with the peer group as well as the pilot groups. By this way we can able to develop our hypothesis. Second is the examination of the data and record for the possible trends, and whatever the trends is going for the research for the particular subjects we go through and we can gather that information. Third is the review of the similar studies. Whatever the similar studies done by the other researcher, on that basis we and what kind of hypothesis or how they are able the hypothesis, on that basis we can develop our hypothesis. So this is it is very important consideration when we are developing the hypothesis, that we have to review similar studies, whatever the study is done in past, and on that basis we also able to develop the hypothesis, and by this way we can get a very good insight for developing the hypothesis. Next is the exploratory personal investigation and observation. Whatever the information and whatever the observation we are gathered during the problem findings or during the objective designing or during the literature review, on that basis we can explore certain hypotheses. Logical deduction from the existing theory. Whatever the theory exists, on that basis we are deducting some information, and on that basis of information we are able to design the hypothesis and continuity of the research. Or the last point, the second last point is considered that on the continuity of the research we also designing the hypothesis. So continuity basis hypothesis is designing. Intuition and the personal experience. Intuition and personal experience is also giving a very good insight or very good input for designing the hypothesis. Sometimes the researcher experience is very good regarding that relevant topic or relevant area where they are studying, and that basis the researcher is very smartly or very easily able to design the hypothesis. So simply we can say that these are the sources. By that sources, or by using of this kind of sources, we are able to design the hypothesis. Type of hypothesis. There are various type of hypothesis. The first is considered as the descriptive hypothesis. There are assumptions that describe the characteristics such as the size, form or distribution of the variables. That variable may be an object, persons or the organization or the situation or the event. So when we are able to describe the variables in our research in respect of size, form and distribution, that kind of hypothesis is considered and the descriptive hypothesis. Example of the descriptive hypothesis is the public enterprises are more amenable for the centralized planning. So here that the centralized planning is described or descriptive hypothesis we are using in this sentence. public enterprise are more amenable for the centralized planning. So when we are using the centralized planning, public enterprise is more amenable. So this is the example of the descriptive hypothesis. Next type of hypothesis is considered as the rational hypothesis. So rational hypothesis, there are the assumptions that describe the relationship between two variables. Two variables suggested may be the positive or negative or the causal relationship. So a relationship hypothesis is explanatory hypothesis, also called as the explanatory hypothesis. Or here the example of the relationship hypothesis is families with the higher income spend more for the recreation. So it is the relationship hypothesis between the variables higher income and the recreation. So if the person have a family with the higher spend the high amount on the recreation. Next is the causal hypothesis. The causal hypothesis is the state that the existence of the changes in one variable causes or lead to affect the another variable. The first variable is called the independent variable and the latter is called the dependent variable. So causal under the causal hypothesis, that is called as the cause and effect relation between the variables. So dependent variable changes due to the involvement or changes in the independent variables, and that change might be the positive or the negative change. So in a very simple manner, causal hypothesis, in causal hypothesis we can understand cause and effect relationship. After that there is the null hypothesis. So simply the null hypothesis is when a hypothesis is stated negative, it is called the null hypothesis. It is a no differences and no relationships in hypothesis, that state that no differences exist between the parameter and the statistics being compared to, or not relation exists between the variables being compared. It is usually represented as H0. So null hypothesis is simply represented as H0. Means in null hypothesis we can say that there is no differences between the parameter and statistics we are taken in our research. So example of the null hypothesis is there is no relation between a family income and the expenditure on recreation. If finding is that there is no establishment of the relation between the family income and the recreation, then we uses the null hypothesis. But if there is the relation between the family recreation and the higher income, we are using the alternative hypothesis. On that basis we go for the alternative hypothesis, because here there is no relation between the family income and the expenditure on recreation. Next, alternative hypothesis. So alternative hypothesis, it is a hypothesis that describe the researcher prediction that there exists a relation between the two variables, or it is a opposite of null hypothesis. It is expressed at HA or H1. So simply we can say that that is the opposite of the null hypothesis. In the null hypothesis there is no relation between the variables, but here there is the relation between the variables. So it is called null hypothesis. So here example of the null hypothesis. Null hypothesis denoted with the capital H and A or H1, that is given in this slide. How null hypothesis is written. Example, there is a definite relation between the family income and expenditure on a recreation. Means here we can establish a relation between two variables. One variable is the family income, other variable is recreation. So in null hypothesis, there is no relation between two variables, family income and recreation, but in alternative hypothesis there is a relation between, or we can say that the different relation between family income and recreation. Next is form of a relation. So, first type of non-directional or versus directional relation. There is a relation between xy, and if x goes up y, or as x increase y. So, on that basis independent variables and dependent variable define that. So, in this slide we can say that how dependent variable or independent defined that. Here in the slide that y is the dependent variable, x is an independent variable, y changes due to changes in the x, and that is the reason y is considered as the dependent variable or x is considered as the independent variables. Next kind of hypothesis is a directional hypothesis. X causes y to changes. If x changes, increase or decrease, change might be the increase or decrease, when y will increase or decrease, that is called a causal relation. So, changes in x depend upon changes in y, then we can say that there is the causal relation between the x and y hypothesis, because that changes might be the increase or decrease changes in x, and that increase or decrease changes in x depend upon the increase or decrease changes in the y. So, we can simply say that there is the relation between x and y is the causal relation, and here x considered as the dependent variable or y considered as the independent variable, because changes in x due to changes in y. Next slide is direction of relation. If x increases, y increases in a positive relation. If x increases, y decreases, that is a negative or inverse relation. Or if x changes, y does not changes, there is no changes, no relation. So, here the directional relationship, there are three type of directional relationship. First is the positive directional relationship, second is the negative directional relationship, and third is the neutral or no relationship. So, simply if increase in x, increase in y, that is called a positive relationship. If in x increases, y decreases, there is called a negative relationship. If x changes, there is no changes in y, collision, there is no relation between x and y. Next slide is non-directional hypothesis, the weakest form. There is a relation between x and y, non-causal correlation statement x and y, means we can say that there is no correlation between x and y. Next is correlation relation between x, y, or when we are talking about the correlation relation between x, y, we first talking about the positive correlation. Here we are seeing that there are two variable, HR work and earning. So, here both are increasing because they have a positive correlation between the two variables x and the y. X stand for the HR works or y stand for the earning. So, here in this slide we can understand that here there is the positive correlation between these two variables. In another slide we can see that there is the negative correlation between these variables, where the value of two variables co-vary, one increases and another decreases. So, here we can say that the negative correlation between the variables. Next slide is related with the functions or role of hypothesis. What is the actual function and role of the hypothesis? So first is it give a definite point to the investigation and provide direction to the study. What kind of a study we are going to do in our analysis process, it give you a definite investigation or definite direction. So first important function of the hypothesis, and the second is it determine the data need. Whatever the data required we can determine through the hypothesis. Third part is it specify the source of data. Whatever the source of data we can use in our study, that is specified by the hypothesis. And the fourth is it suggests which type of research is likely to be more appropriate. Hypothesis is also suggesting us or suggesting the researcher that which type of research we have to go for our study. Next is it determine the most appropriate technique of the analysis, which statistical tool we are using in our research, that also depend upon the hypothesis. So statistical tool decision is also depend upon our hypothesis or by development of the hypothesis. And the next point is it contribute to the development of the theory. Hypothesis is also contributing the development of the theory. The evolution of the theory depend upon the hypothesis. First someone design the hypothesis, testing the hypothesis and increasing the acceptability of the hypothesis in a very significant manner, then hypothesis considered as in the theory. So development of theory is also depend upon the hypothesis. Thank you.